Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world, and welcome to this AdAge custom webcast sponsored by dataxu. The topic of today's webcast is Programmatic Goes Global. I'm Bob Norp, your moderator for today. Now, before we begin, we have just a few quick items to go over. We will hear from today's presenters, and then we'll open the floor to your questions. To participate in the Q&A portion of the webcast, all you have to do is type your question into the Ask a Question text area below the presentation window, and then click the Submit button. You may submit questions at any time during the webcast, and we will address as many questions as time permits after our presenters' prepared remarks. Now, please also note the series of widgets that are available for you toward the bottom of the console. And as a reminder, the hashtag for today's event is Going Global Programmatic. Now let's get started with today's webinar, Programmatic Goes Global. Our presenters for today are Bernard Glock, former president of the World Federation of Advertisers, and Ed Montez, who is Chief Revenue Officer at dataxu. Now, Bernard is formerly from the World Federation of Advertisers. He is a leading proponent of the positive role programmatic marketing technology can play with multinational brands. He's the former Vice President, Global Media Purchases at Procter & Gamble, and Glock is CEO of Bernard Glock Media Leadership Company. Now, Ed Montez leads dataxu's global sales and marketing activities. A respected international leader, Ed has a deep understanding of how advertisers can apply technology to become data-driven and transform their business. Now, much of today's discussion will be based on findings from a study Advertising Age conducted on behalf of dataxu this year, surveying nearly 400 marketers with global responsibilities at brands and agencies from nearly 30 countries around the world. Should be an interesting topic, so let's get our discussion started with our first speaker. Ed, take it away.
Thank you, Bob. Well, first, just let's take a moment to go over the agenda, the things we want to talk about today. So we're going to cover the state of programmatic, what's driving growth, are we ready, what's on the horizon, and then obviously open up for best practices and some Q&A. But first, just a moment on why we saw this as a valuable research topic. And the word programmatic is all around us these days. In fact, just recently the ANA named programmatic as its word of the year. Actually made me think of the rhyme of the ancient mariner with water, water everywhere and not a drop to drink. But it's not really because it's everywhere that made me think of it, but rather actually the precursor to that line in Coleridge's poem is water, water everywhere and all the boards did shrink. And in fact, we as media practitioners are being surrounded by programmatic, not just in the US or in the UK, but actually throughout the entire world, and thus the reason we thought this was important. We know that in the US and the United Kingdom that the markets had been really awash in programmatic fever for about more than 5 years, but that the shift to audience culture had been slower to take place in other markets. Looks like, though, that 2013's promise of programmatic everywhere is rapidly becoming a reality in 2014. So undoubtedly, you can see from these charts that programmatic is growing. But programmatic is no longer limited to the long-tail publishers or remnant inventory. It's actually become part of the fabric of digital itself. And here you can see that Magna Global projects programmatic to grow to be 10% of the entire global 500 billion ad spend by 2018. It's important to note that this is not just RTB, real-time bidding, but it's actually both real-time bidding and non-RTB, a point we'll come back to in exactly when we talk about what programmatic is. In fact, Mediabrands predicts that worldwide media sales via programmatic will rise 52% this year to 21 billion and 27% over each of the next 4 years to 53 billion in 2018. Real numbers that we simply can't ignore. Now, it's important to know that it's growing everywhere, as I mentioned. It's most likely, as you can see from these charts, it's biggest in North America and the EU. And as a rate of growth, as North America and the EU are slow, we can see acceleration throughout Asia and Latin America starting to grow. So wherever you do business, programmatic has to become part of your core competencies if you're going to stay competitive. So let's talk about what programmatic is in practice. A couple of guideposts here. Let's take them one by one. So programmatic at first is really about targeting. It makes one-to-one targeting decisions at the impression level. No longer are you dealt with buying blocks of thousands or chunks of time. But beyond just targeting, programmatic is also about workflow. Workflow accommodates global execution. Employ a workflow that allows for team standardization with plug-and-play localization across data, inventory, and even regulatory policy. The AdAge research confirms what others are finding, and that the Winterberry Group, who recently surveyed some publishers and platforms, noted, where the Winterberry Group was focused on publishers and platforms, this survey is really focused on brands and agencies. But the findings that we're seeing across these groups are very similar around the topic of workflow. One respondent put it this way: what's key to growing practices across regions is that the core data management and transactional platforms remain the same. That way, just the data changes depending on the region, but the technology and algorithms powering the strategy remain consistent. You just customize the regional data. Having one system overall is an important part of growing practice across borders. So you have targeting, you have workflow, and the next big bucket here is pricing. Think of this way. Pay the perfect price for each individual engagement with a choice of contract types, from open auctions to private exchanges to automated decisioning on guaranteed media buys. Those are sort of the three big blocks. But note, none of these descriptions entail long-tail inventory, remnant inventory, or the like. Programmatic is mainstream and omni-channel today. It's important to consider programmatic as an approach and a philosophy that can and should be applied to your media investment. The drivers for broad adoption of programmatic are simple to understand and similar overseas to domestic markets. It's an important quote from the overall research that was done. It synthesizes the reactions of many of the 351 respondents. Now that we've defined programmatic, we've seen some evidence of its growth in the data Magna shows us. Let's look at why it's growing so fast. One key finding from the paper is that benefits are universal, somewhat. Global programmatic uses ubiquitous internet to normalize media markets, something that we haven't seen in traditional media. The technology is making the world flat for us. All these great benefits you get locally can be used globally. There's a network effect, so using it in one place exponentially benefits the other. And what makes it powerful is that technology creates a lowest common denominator for execution. So let's take a look at the key drivers and benefits here. Why programmatic? Well, anytime we talk about programmatic in the recent research, it seems that the low-hanging fruit is effectiveness and cost efficiencies. Spend less, drive more outcomes, or both. It's important here. Have Ben Jankowski from MasterCard, who was quoted in our survey. Programmatic helps us to maximize our spend and do more things than we otherwise would afford. So I think it's important here to consider whether you are first enrolling into programmatic, or when you're trying to convince your organization, it's important to prove the value. The first step always seems to be around cost. And we talked about workflow already, and workflow improvements seem to be a very important piece of why to move programmatic and to move programmatic globally. Whether you operate the platform yourself or commission the work, workflow improves, and that frees up time to do strategic work. Sort of the ubiquitous nature of programmatic and of global programmatic propagates best practices, global workflow with local pricing, local data, and local inventory providers. Whether you're have the same workflow in the UK and Benelux, all the benefits accrue even if you're using local data. So one platform, one workflow, local data equals to better improvement. And here you have our own Bruce Journey talking about how this can actually benefit in taking out some of the lower end work and letting you focus on the higher level work, up and downstream. Also very important, and something that is somewhat new in the lexicon of programmatic, is the notion of how it improves customer experience. Now, I think we all recognize that the one-to-one addressability means you can sculpt the engagement to the person, and programmatic is being used as a core element of branding as well as performance-oriented campaigns across all ad formats. But what's important about customer experience here is that you can optimize your archetype locally and create a competitive advantage. The advantage is your proprietary information. And a marketer may have a global client archetype, but that persona has very different local flavor. To me, it's sort of like thinking of the notorious U.S. soccer mom persona, but that's simply a mom to the rest of the world. Probably the most recent, this is probably the most recent impactful realization of using programmatic, improving customer experience. You drive customer experience using programmatic through a common understanding and engagement of the customer globally. So let's look at how programmatic benefits get applied or accrued across the globe. One of the questions we hear marketers asking is, what's the right balance between central marketing mandates, local marketing, needs and experimentation? Does it make sense to build solid best practices at headquarters and apply them locally? Or do you allow local markets to experiment, discover what works best, and then socialize those across the geos? If you want to look at the data from the study we did, survey respondents tend to start at headquarters, then apply locally. It has to start somewhere, I guess, is the point. Whether you end up employing a strong central approach or a loose confederation, it has to start somewhere, and typically that's with marketing leadership. I'm going to turn it over to Bernard now, who's going to walk us through how to assess a local market's readiness for programmatic.
Thank you, Ed. So we will talk individual markets, and we will have two different looks at it. First, how important is it to move the market into programmatic? And second, how ready is it to be moved? Now here we have two interesting quotes, one from Martin Brown from dataxu. He says that there are leading markets like North America who may be ahead, but brands also try to execute across the globe rather than doing things piece by piece. And another proponent of this one is Ben Jankowski again from MasterCard, where he literally says there's only a handful of markets where we have not yet been using programmatic, and they want a truly global approach. In fact, I was personally very impressed by his boss, the CMO of MasterCard, who we met just 2 days ago in New York, who was so in programmatic that I was surprised that a CMO gets so much into such a detail, which for MasterCard is not anymore a detail, but a global template. Now let's go on and see on the first question. We asked how important is each of the following regions for expanding internationally. So on a 10-point scale, 10 was extremely important. The average importance of expanding was in the 6s for North America, the 5s for Asia, Western Europe, and South America, and the 3s and the 4s in the longer tail here. Important to outline that 4 out of 10 respondents say expanding into Asia, Western Europe, and South America is very or extremely important. So that's a score of 8, 9, or 10 on this 10-point scale. Now, important when we talk expansion is that the principles basically remain the same everywhere. So you use automation, you use the big data across all channels to achieve higher levels of targeting, relevance, efficiency, and impact. Now, regional variations obviously add a layer of complexity when this is applied on a worldwide scale. So local approaches must adapt to differences in the availability of data, consumer privacy regulations, inventory, and popular formats and devices, and we will talk this more in the next slides. So here's the next criteria. Basically, we see 2 axes. On the bottom, you see the availability of data, and on the left side, the privacy protocols. And basically, the chart says that adoption of programmatic will be faster when more data is available and it is less subject to regulation. Now, pretty clearly, programmatic thrives on data and starves on data-poor environments. This is pretty nicely expressed here. And geographies with very strong laws around consumer privacy actually made it harder to collect the data, normalize them, and use the data. Here we move into media and device density. You see on the bottom the device proliferation, and then what we call the publisher proliferation. Similar thing, adoption of programmatic will be faster when there's greater variety among publishers and device inventory types. It's similar to a stock exchange. You know, programmatic thrives with volatility, liquidity, and we came up with a word which I like. It's optionality, which is basically the ability to choose what you buy and how to engage. So in developed markets with a mature media and advertising ecosystem, the sheer volume of supply can simplify our marketers' ability to get value, especially when they are armed with the right data, making them particularly ripe for programmatic. Here we compare platform and cost. Now obviously, and again, down there you have the cost of media, and on the left side, the more fixed cost of the platform ownership. So programmatic adoption is faster in markets with more expensive cost of media. Now that is especially true when you have to amortize the total cost of the platform ownership across those media prices, yielding very different ROIs. So the relative cost of media and the fixed cost of the platform providing programmatic services are critical to determining where you will achieve the highest ROI. Now let's look what our respondents said about the future. We also asked them to look into the future and see what are the key trends here. Now, respondents see programmatic rapidly maturing along 3 areas. First, what we call touching more of marketing. Now, here's a good time to just recap a bit where we have been moving on. And in fact, when I left Procter & Gamble and launched my own business, Mike Baker, the dataxu CEO, called me right when he launched his company. He had just a few employees. And since then, I have been accompanying this journey. So in the very early days, I think it began in 2007, when Microsoft, Yahoo, and DoubleClick launched their platforms. And they were limited to display. And most of the inventory was from long-tail publishers, and premium publishers quickly started using it to monetize decent but basically unsold or remnant inventory. And they often did this anonymously, so not to cause sales channel conflict. And that's how I think the reputation of a crappy thing came in. Now, video and mobile quickly followed, I think in 2007. Programmatic premium, something is kind of alongside dataxu's style, applying algorithmic decision-making, was in 2011, dataxu and Ford. Private exchanges, where premium publishers offered good inventory, I think came in 2012, and the programmatic premium using platforms to automate the buying and selling of exclusive direct buys came in 2013. So quite a nice journey. And we will see more as programmatic does touch more of the marketing world. The second area where we see maturity is addressing via viewability and fraud. I like the initiative from IAB and MRC, who provided more guidance here and definitions. Fraud is an issue. This has accelerated dramatically, basically in line with the dramatic growth of programmatic. And here what we see is that innovation takes place where dataxu first offered a fraud guarantee, which basically provides higher quality to companies using it than ever before. The third one is encroaching on traditional media. I think we all agree that TV as we know it is not dead, but it does change, becomes much more interchangeable with other devices. And as programmatic matures, as more it will go into other media as well, step by step. Now, this is a nice one. So if you ever wondered why there are so many companies in that space, I think we have to blame the VCs. Programmatic is so big and growing so fast, and VCs are willing to fund a lot of those companies to try to capture this value. So we as marketers have difficult choices. We have quite some vendors out there who all try to do the same. So it is confusing, but the pendulum is clearly swinging towards consolidation, which will help us to deal with this myriad of different suppliers. Yeah, here's a quote, in fact, from the Winterberry research. That's interesting that they see that there are 10 times more technology players competing for that business than the market can actually support. That is cramped, to say the least, and that's what I said, we will see consolidation here. Now that's a beautiful thing. As we see consolidation, we get a much better unified view on the consumer. That is crucial to put the consumer into the center of everything and encompass the consumer with all we know around the consumer, from desktop to mobile tablet, in the household or via connected TV. That's an interesting one. It's a three-way alliance how that business is being done. We have the advertisers and brands on one side, the various agencies on the other side, and platforms on that side. Now, some brands and advertisers take the platform in-house. Agencies have their own platforms in the house. So relationships are evolving, but these three parties will be glued together. One of the issues we see is that responsibilities are not always clear. People tap on each other. There is some interest that can clash. But to be honest, over time, we are all convinced that this will be sorted out. An interesting learning came up when we asked, is your agency structuring departments or the organization to take advantage of programmatic technologies? And only 29% advertisers or brands said, yes, I will do that, while 55% of the agencies. And interestingly, most questions I get as a consultant now is on the 70% of advertisers and brands who don't know yet what to do and how to organize differently in that world. And it is very obvious that given programmatic and given that it touches so much of media buying, data management, reporting, and measurement, that consolidation can happen. And using a platform without actually allowing your organizational structure to adapt does leave a lot of value on the table. I talked too much. Ed, you will keep going?
Absolutely, I'll take over. It's interesting, this notion of organizational catch-up and the ability to change or restructure reminds me of something I read recently about sort of the evolution of the computer industry, and as things move from mainframe to mini computer to PC. I saw an interesting quote, which was, why buy a truck if you're going to use it like a wheelbarrow? And I think if you're investing in technology, I mean, it's an old technology quote, right? But if you're investing in technology, I think we actually need to make sure that the organizational structures can adapt without leaving that value on the table. Well, let's get into some of these other questions that came up. Notably, is there clarity of ownership? And that's a related question to organizational readiness, right? Organizational clarity. Again, the survey asked agencies and brands who own strategy, reporting, measurement, and implementation. And let me tell you, the difference in perceptions was pretty stark. Take a look. So when asked who primarily sets global policies for any particular topic, you can see what the agency respondents thought. Agencies identified who owns reporting, 75% said it was the agency who led the discipline. Most of them, the times when the agencies were considering or answering these questions, only strategy failed to get the majority, and that was by a small percentage, 2 percentage points. But when you consider the brand's perception, take a look. The identical questions by brand respondents expressed dramatically different perceptions, and the gap between the two is pretty enormous when you look at that perception gap. So we'll look at what respondents said were best practices. But one best practice they didn't identify, and we think is super important, is the need to align all the players. So this data doesn't offer guidance about who's right or wrong in these answers, but it does argue for opening up communication to make sure parties are aligned around responsibilities. Like Bernard said, programmatic is a three-legged stool, and if there's a lack of alignment, execution will surely suffer. So best practices. Not surprisingly, over 350 respondents have a lot of advice to offer. And what we did was break the paper into 6 best practices, and we'll go over some of those today, right now, in fact, in this webinar. So the first one is get started and keep moving. Another way, basically all of the respondents and all of the individuals that we talked to and that you'll see quoted throughout this paper were very clear. They said, stop sitting, move, do something. And Ben, I really like what Ben Jankowski from MasterCard said. You see the quote here that starts with "You're always." What we didn't put in the slide, which was the precursor to it, and I think extremely valuable and very human, was don't get freaked out by the complexity of it. Right? So again, let's just start. And if you're not starting, we can assure you that your competition is embracing it. And quite honestly, very much like the scientific method, you're going to benefit from trial and error here. One thing that we'll say for sure is you don't have to do everything at once. Start small and actually grow. Importantly, we noticed that it was really important to establish KPIs. So the only way to accurately assess the effectiveness of your current programs and any moves that you might make into programmatic was to establish a common language. Very, very true globally. International complicates matters more, and more than half of our respondents, nearly 52.7%, said that comparison is difficult when buying internationally. And 60% surprisingly told us that as an organization, they don't use a central tool. But interestingly, there's huge demand for trying to standardize. Almost 3/4 of the respondents said they're trying to standardize. So we know programmatic generates as much data as it consumes. That's a challenge. And often agencies, brands, and publishers use different KPIs, an even bigger challenge. But you can overcome this if you develop common metrics to measure success. Finding a partner you can trust. This was a theme that came out throughout the research. And there's a lot of options out there, so it's easy to be overwhelmed. And likewise, there's a lot of jargon out there, so it's easy to be confused. So while, on one hand, comparing capabilities is important, it's one way. Something that stood out to us from the research and from our experience is another good way to assess your options is to see if the partner you're choosing or considering choosing, if they can help you, if they can actually help you learn, teach you what's going on in programmatic. But not only is it the people that present to you, check and see if they have people invested in teaching and learning as an organization, and if they have the infrastructure to support this education, systems and tools in place that actually develop you as a partner as well as their organization. We also noted that whether you plan to go self-service or commission the use of the technology, make sure that the partner you're choosing has the platform they're claiming. Actually look at it. And inevitably, one of the hottest topics today, and Bernard mentioned it, is the notions of, or the subjects of fraud and viewability. These are tough challenges. So you want to make sure that the partner you're choosing doesn't overpromise and underdeliver, and whether they're upfront and reasonable about what actually can be accomplished. Inevitably, the notion of fraud is more important globally. And we saw this talking to one of the respondents, mentioned that having a higher level relationship means that it's not just on you as a brand or as an agency to make sure that the data is right, that the fraud isn't existent. And they stress to us it's especially important overseas where you see more fragmentation, smaller websites, and actually have less control over what's running. Stay close to your data. As mentioned, programmatic generates a lot of data. One thing you want to do is make sure that your contracts entitle you to keep the data and that you have good use of that data. You'll be shocked what you might find out there. And surprisingly, there's a perceived notion that the safe choice is picking a large company. And the question becomes, do you want that large company to have all of your data in one place and have to run it back from them? Things to consider as you choose partners. Focus on audience, not websites. Programmatic requires marketers to relinquish some control over the planning process, and that can be hard. You have to focus on people you're trying to reach and outcomes rather than the publishers which happen to attract those people. It's about understanding and engaging your audience. And the respondents reminded us that this may be a big difference from market to market. In international markets, people, especially those who are just starting in programmatic, people can really worry about not knowing what websites they're running on. Don't overgeneralize. Markets are not one size fits all. We see this throughout time and time again as we work with global marketers. You have to understand the local differences. So it's important to establish some generalities, but keep in mind the local differences. I think that brings us, Bob, to Q&A section.
Absolutely, Ed. Thank you very much. And we're now ready to open the floor to your questions. As a reminder, to participate in our Q&A, just type your question into the Ask a Question text area, then click the Submit button. If we don't get to your question, we'll do our best to get back to you later. And the first question I have here is for Bernard. Is global programmatic spend more prevalent with U.S.-based companies marketing outside the U.S. or non-U.S.-based companies marketing in their local regions? What was your general impression about the marketplace right now?
I think at the beginning you see, let's start differently. If the global managers do a good job in searching and reapplying, I think we will see more US-based marketers reapplying programmatic in other regions and countries versus those markets doing it themselves. Over time, I would expect that to be much more in equilibrium, and in fact, I would hope to see that international marketers in fact go faster in moving once this has been established in more markets.
Do you expect to see variations in how these types of companies embrace programmatic in any other ways right now?
Not really. Again, we talk about the global principles which will be implemented locally, so I don't expect any real variations here.
Well, that's great. The next question I have here is for Ed. How quickly are the largest players taking programmatic global? I mean, what will the ecosystem look like at the end of 2015?
Yeah, so I think we see that the top global marketers are, in fact, sponsoring the use of programmatic in all markets. And I think that there are very different approaches to this, and some of it has to do to sort of whether they're set up as a strong central marketing organization, which is with local execution, or it's a looser confederacy, sort of as we talked about in the presentation. But I can tell you real-world examples. We have a large financial services client who actually promotes best practices from the center, has laid down some large established goals around their overall sort of digital marketing goals and the role that programmatic will play on that. Chosen us as a platform, if you will, in order to facilitate some of those goals. But interestingly, also enables and encourages the local marketing leads to take a percentage of their budget and experiment. And I think that's certainly an interesting way, one way of doing it. We also have a very large client, which is completely dominated by sort of a headquarter marketing approach, taking all of the programmatic and running it from one location for upwards of 27 markets. So I don't think that the model is clear whether it's going to be local, strong local, from a softer center, or if it's going to be a strong center. Some of that might differ from category and from budgets. But what we do see is that all the major global marketers are engaging in programmatic. See it consistently across categories, and sort of consistently at the top end of the marketer food chain, if you will.
Well, and that leads to another interesting question here, which I'm going to throw toward Bernard. I mean, when selecting a programmatic partner, what should we look for in terms of global qualifications?
Yeah, partly Ed mentioned this already in his last few slides. What I would add is I would look for partners who already got their feet wet in local markets, so they already have experience. So you deal with somebody who knows what can happen locally versus somebody who promises to do everything and doesn't really know.
Here's another interesting question that I picked up here from the audience, and this one I'm going to throw at Ed. with the perception gaps between agencies and brands, I mean, how can an agency ensure that they're closing this gap and strategically partner with their clients?
Yeah, I think we're at an interesting sort of inflection point right now in sort of the agency model and its adoption of programmatic. Clearly, there are some strong and very capable agency expertise, whether it's at the agency trading desk or at the agency of record, where they are the perceived programmatic experts. And I think at the same time, because sort of at the outset where we see programmatic is the word of the year, and it's like it is all around us and it is everywhere. I mean, I think when something catches that sort of fire, everyone and clients are no different, want to own that expertise and understand that expertise. So we're certainly in this cycle where we see some major brands taking programmatic in-house and sort of disavowing their agencies from touching it. And we also see the opposite from agencies, where they're trying to create, continue to create sort of this expertise, and there's this natural tension that's occurring. What we think will probably happen, and what I recommend, is sort of a lot more communication. I think that if we can all partner, sort of as Bernard said, sort of if we can create this three-way business alliance between the agency, the brand, and the platform, there's probably one common understanding foundational piece, which is education. I think that's probably the model it's going to be. My guess is that many clients, while some may take it in-house, many other clients are going to be dependent on their agencies to run their platforms. But when you think of global marketers and the need for consistency, sort of, what we see throughout this research is the need for consistency in order to get in order to accrue the exponential gains. And I think that consistency comes from the selection of a technology platform. Somewhat self-serving for me to say that, but I think it's true. So I think if we can come to alignment that a brand, with the advice of its agency, is going to make a technology selection, and then let's all educate ourselves as to what are the brand's goals, and how do we share that information consistently across partners. So a lot of it comes down to simple communication, unfortunately.
Well, but it's great advice that you offer. Hey, Bernard, here's a question from Sarah in the audience, and I'm assuming it's because of your global expertise. Which global markets are most advanced in programmatic techniques? And I would add the question, why would you think that they are the most advanced?
I think it is the U.S. I would mention that first. In fact, I see most marketers I deal with coming to the U.S. to learn and see what happens here, versus U.S.-based marketers go out and learn and see what happens outside of the U.S. Why that is happening? Well, entrepreneurs happen to start here. Data availability is good. The market is huge. Privacy regulations are in the early stages, so I think the criteria we talked before are all pretty good in the US, and this is where this is a natural place to start. Following, I think, would be UK and Germany, and once it gets established there, Europe is very fast in adopting it in the other countries, and then Asia. So that would be my order.
Now, Ed, here's a question from Rebecca, and this one's near and dear to my heart, having worked a lot with TV executives. Do you think TV will find similar benefits from programmatic? Do you think it's possible to create a similar programmatic ecosystem for television?
I think it's possible, and I think, quite honestly, it's probably inevitable. But when I say that, I'd sort of say, pause. When we define programmatic, right, we're not necessarily talking about simply open auctions. There are lots of different models that might apply to television. But when we, so that's one thing. So hey, don't everyone run off saying that Ed's telling the world that the television market's going to be corrupted by RTB, because that's not what I'm saying. But we do see, right? I mean, we see large holding companies. I think Matt Seiler at Media Brands at IPG, he made the proclamation that 50% of all of their media was going to be bought programmatically, I think, in 3 years, which I think lines up to be around 2017-ish, or 2016. So that's, it's interesting, right? It's going to happen. I think there's some foundational requirements, some a priori matters that have to occur. Some of it has to do with television infrastructure. I think, but we are seeing that even the notion of television is changing, and sort of how consumers are sort of atomizing content and viewing it in their own way, is going to affect the television market. So technological changes are occurring. The television market, there will be some facet of the television market, probably not live events or live sports, but some facet of the television market which will in fact go programmatic. And in fact, speaking of sports, I think ESPN made a recent announcement that they're going to sell some inventory now, some Sports Center inventory via programmatic. So it's happening. It's going to happen. Again, I don't think it's the entire market, but it's going to be significant. Some technology changes need to occur. And I would say this, today dataxu enables television buying for a few brands, and we believe that we'll continue to do that in the future. And I don't think that we're the only programmatic cloud company that's doing that today.
Now, Bernhard, Henrik in the audience paid a compliment, said that you have some really great slides on what is required for programmatic to thrive, but he has a follow-up question. How can advertisers get the data they need from this?
Yeah, my advice would be to first talk to your agencies, simply ask them what is available or what is missing, or the programmatic suppliers, like dataxu, the ones who are already expanding globally. What they do market surveys, so they have a roadmap basically from the key countries already sorted out, and they launch one by one depending on the suitability, the cost, and as we talk, the infrastructure. So just don't hesitate to contact them directly.
Now, Ed, Vicky wants to know, do you have any concrete examples of KPIs that you can offer up?
So let's just say, let me answer it this way. KPIs tend to be proprietary to our clients, so they'll likely be generic if I start giving them. I think the one that is most, or sort of the subject area of KPIs that most often leads to disagreement is around the notion of attribution, and I think that tends to be the one area that requires the most conversation, and probably where there's the most delta, if you will, between markets in terms of sophistication and deployment of different attribution models. So having said that, it's also the area where there's probably the most opportunity to really create competitive advantage and to create or accrue sort of global benefit if you can agree on a global attribution model. It's really hard to do because when we talk about sort of globalization and the local market effects, in digital in particular, the pricing and selling models really drive some of what you can do and sort of some of the benefits that you accrue. So, that's a real challenge, and I would say without giving away anyone's sort of proprietary information, it would be one that I'd say contact us and we can talk offline.
Always a good thing. Now, I have a question here for Bernard. Seth is asking to re-see a slide, so maybe the team at dataxu can help us re-show the slide with all the players. And the question that he has is, tell us where and if you see any consolidation happening as we move forward and as programmatic grows.
Oh, if I had this foresight, I would invest my money accordingly. That would be nice. No, personally, I would not. I think there will be many different market forces playing around, from big companies who want to grow into the programmatic area or within programmatic, where companies want to enlarge themselves and move on faster. I personally would not put any bets out. I have seen too many big weddings who didn't happen for whatever reason. So maybe Ed has some perspective here beyond me, but I would not be speculating what's happening. But we know, given that there are 10 times more players out there than the market can adopt, there will be consolidation.
I think I read not so recently, that there's been something like 200 acquisitions in the last 2 years in this space. So in fact, consolidation has been happening all along. Not all of them are headline grabbing, because a lot of young technology companies are being bought early, and also some companies who just don't have the financial or product wherewithal to sustain are being acquired. Sometimes it's a happy situation, sometimes it's not. I think what's incredible is that we continue to see more and new companies enter the space, and I think that we should all be prepared a little bit to consider sort of some of the new market entrants into the space. We talk about the private companies a lot, and obviously dataxu is one of them, but there are a lot of large companies like Google and Facebook seeming to ready to enter the space, as well as Amazon. And I think those, it's going to be a very interesting market, and we'll see sort of how it shakes out. I don't have any clear answers, but I would say for as much consolidation that's happened over the last few years, there's been more new market entrants, and now we're seeing established companies, whether they be software or technology companies, enter into the market. It's a high growth market, right? It has a very, very high growth rate, and it's a large market. Advertising has a massive market opportunity, so you're going to attract a ton of companies into the space and a ton of investment, as we've seen.
Well, and another big question that comes up a lot is, and Marcus brings it up here, is fraud as pervasive in all markets, Ed? Is it just limited to one market or a couple markets, or is it across all markets right now?
Yeah, so I mean, I would say that I don't want to make a sweeping generalization to say that it's in all markets. I can tell you it's in more than just the large markets. And I would argue that fraud is a little bit like water, and it's gonna seek its way to any opening it can find. So I don't have any data in front of me that says it's as pervasive in all markets, but I can tell you that fraud is pervasive globally, and that's why we've taken such a strong position in sort of guaranteeing the quality of our inventory supply to our clients. Again, I don't have the data in front of me. There's been a tremendous amount of news in the last 48 hours, and a tremendous amount of reports being issued, or press releases issued from everyone from Google to other providers on the state of fraud, and I encourage you to read all of that information. But I would say that it is a challenge and an opportunity for this market, not surprisingly, but I do believe it's everywhere.
Bernard, how do global brands view proprietary data when it comes to leveraging programmatic techniques? Does it vary by country, or is it third parties, or is third party still preferred since it can be easier to access? I mean, what's your impressions as far as what companies are doing globally right now?
Oh, that's a big question with many facets. Let me say that way. As better the data, as better you can target programmatically. As more proprietary the data, as more an advertiser can carve out competitive advantages above and beyond what others could be doing. So sophisticated big advertisers, I know, count on proprietary data to be unique and gain that competitive advantage. And this is one of the issues when it comes to who you select as a partner. Can you trust this partner to keep the proprietary data you have in-house and just obliged to you as a marketer who invested in these proprietary data? Or is it somehow leaking and others benefit from what you have been doing? So my view is that global brands and more sophisticated ones will use all possible data they have available, including proprietary data, to come to better targeting. I doubt that it varies dramatically country by country for the big global advertisers. There may be criteria, and some of which we talked, like size of the market, just the money that is in there, the level of the media cost, the amount of the fixed pricing when you launch platforms, whether you get payout. So there will be criteria whether it makes sense to do research and provide proprietary data, or whether you just live with what is out there as third-party data.
Now here's an interesting question from Scott, Ed. How have you seen this adopted with large companies in niche B2B industries? And are most of your experiences with large consumer marketers? I know there's a perception that programmatic tends to be very consumer-based, but are we seeing B2B players also getting involved?
Yeah, most definitely. We have so we are working with several B2B marketers. I guess not surprising. On the B2B side, we see, from a category perspective, we see a lot of technology, or we see more focus from the technology companies who, and consider sort of from the efficiency argument standpoint there, a small improvement in cost efficiency can lead to massive margin improvements for them, given sometimes the size of their technology products or of their services. So the answer is that yes, we absolutely are seeing B2B companies use programmatic, and in fact, we're absolutely seeing B2B companies use programmatic at the global level. Probably, actually, I would argue, somewhat leading in that space, quite frankly. And then also, we are working, and we're working with a number of them. So yes.
Oh, yeah, and that pretty much bears out with my own experience. So that's really helpful. Now, this question goes to Bernard. With a focus on mobile in developing countries, how important is a mobile-first global strategy?
Very important for brands and companies who know how to do it. And in countries where mobile is already so much part of your life that you can communicate and engage via mobile. There are different facets. Again, a mobile-first global strategy, is this something you would do as a communication strategy towards your consumers, or would that be a focus of a programmatic supplier to start in mobile first? So there are different facets, but mobile absolutely is a key growth area. In fact, I just read a chart 2 days ago where you saw this gap between mobile usage and spending in mobile, and that gap is huge, kind of where the overall display ads were in the beginning when it all started. So there's definitely a catch-up to be done in terms of recognizing the importance of mobile for consumers and dealing with it in the programmatic and in the communication planning area.
Yeah, and I'd like to add to that, Bob, too. I think one of the keys there is, and I totally agree with Bernard's answer, in that global first, or for mobile, or perhaps let's just do away with the distinction between global and mobile and non-mobile, because I think that's eroding quickly in all aspects of what we're seeing. But one recommendation I would make to parties who are considering how to do programmatic globally, and in particular with mobile emphasis, is to make sure that their partner, because the data infrastructure and the availability of data is so different underlying the mobile system, make sure that your partner allows for policy control of what data is used in targeting and in reporting. If you're not working with someone who allows for policy control set at the individual country level or supplier level, I think that you have real regulatory risk, and I think that's important to note in this space.
And since we have you, Ed, last question. Actually, either of you can jump in on this. I mean, do either of you have specific examples of culture clash in programmatic undertakings? I mean, you don't need to name client names. Jennifer, who asked this question, is not asking for us to air our dirty laundry, but she would like to have some specific examples without identifying information.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, my experience is chock full of culture clashes as we try and get programmatic off the ground, either at the client or the agency level. So, everything from vendor selection, and not just vendor selection in terms of who is your primary platform, but also types of data that you're using, how the data is sourced, the availability of let's call it data creation from site-side opportunities or CRM opportunities at the client. All of these pockets, I've seen conflict, and I would say that the number one source of conflict tends to be around ownership interest. So in some respects, it's ownership of the client. Is it you, programmatic or technology provider, who owns the client relationship, or me, the agency, or even from the client perspective, I'm going to control things. Neither of you is going to do things. So there's the sort of ownership of the relationship that creates conflict. And then I think there's always sort of the inherent conflict over money, and that's been a real clash over, in some instances, number of parties involved, and their position within the relationship to the client. There can be real conflict around transparency, quite frankly. So I think that's from a client perspective, I think that's one of the trends, or perhaps beyond trend now, sort of the demand for transparency in price, the demand for transparency in governance, and the demand for transparency in sort of supply sources, whether it's data or inventory. Certainly we see that those themes typically create conflict in the three-legged stool that we talk about between technology, provider, agency, and brand.
Well, with that, I think we've reached the end of our time. Thank you for attending this AdAge custom webcast sponsored by dataxu. Please take a moment to answer our exit survey by clicking on the red widget at the bottom of your console. We'd really appreciate it. You can also view and listen to this presentation on demand using the same link you used to attend today. You will receive an email as soon as the archive is ready. And all registrants will get the webinar recording and a copy of the report shortly, so look for that, access to that by email soon. On behalf of our guests, Bernard Glock, formerly with World Federation of Advertisers, and Ed Montez of dataxu, thank you for your time and have a great day.